The Mask of Zorro wasn't just a movie, it was a resurrection of a legend. A film filled with secrets, struggles, and moments that almost never made it to the screen. Today, we're uncovering the hidden stories behind one of the greatest swashbuckling adventures ever made. Fact number one, Spielberg's hidden hand. Before a single sword clashed on screen, The Mask of Zorro already had one of Hollywood's most influential forces guiding its destiny: Steven Spielberg. Many fans assume Spielberg came on late, lending his name just to boost the film's credibility, but the truth is the opposite. From the very beginning, it was Spielberg, through his company, Amblin Entertainment, who helped bring the project to life. In the early 1990s, when swashbuckling heroes had largely disappeared from mainstream cinema, Spielberg believed the world was ready for the return of Zorro. He wasn't just a producer reading scripts in an office. He shaped the story's direction, pushed for authenticity, and worked with writers to modernize the character without losing his romantic legacy. For months, Spielberg even considered stepping into the director's chair himself. Imagine that, a Zorro film directed by the same man who gave the world Jurassic Park and E.T. But fate had other plans. Scheduling conflicts pulled him towards Saving Private Ryan, a project too personal to set aside. Still, Spielberg didn't abandon Zorro. Instead, he placed the reins in the hands of Martin Campbell, fresh off reinventing James Bond and GoldenEye. Spielberg stayed close, weighing in on tone, visuals, and even casting decisions. He may not have worn the mask, but his fingerprints are all over the blade. Fact number two, one Zorro, not two. In the earliest drafts of The Mask of Zorro, there was no Alejandro Murrieta, no passing of the sword, and no legacy being built for the future. The original story was much smaller in scope, centered entirely on Don Diego de la Vega, older, slower, and preparing for one final stand against injustice. It was written as a swan song, a farewell to the legend of Zorro rather than the rebirth of one. But studios weren't satisfied with just a nostalgic curtain call. Executives wanted something bigger, something that could sustain sequels, merchandise, and a new generation of fans. The script was reshaped, and with it, Zorro himself. Alejandro Murrieta was born, not as a polished hero, but as a thief and a drunkard, angry, reckless, and carrying the pain of a murdered brother. Suddenly, the story transformed from being about a single man's last mission into a tale of mentorship, legacy, and rebirth. That change elevated the film from a historical adventure into something timeless. It wasn't just one man fighting tyranny, it was the idea of Zorro itself being passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. By rewriting history, the filmmakers created not just a hero, but a legacy. Fact number three, Antonio Banderas almost said no. When Antonio Banderas first read the script, he hesitated. At the time, he was still carving his place in Hollywood. Yes, he had charisma, but he had never carried a big-budget blockbuster. The idea of becoming Zorro felt overwhelming, too risky, too big. Hollywood had a history of setting actors up for failure when they weren't already household names. But Banderas couldn't ignore what the role represented. For the first time in decades, a Latino actor was being asked to lead a global action film, not as a villain, not as a sidekick, but as the hero. That alone pulled him back to the project. He decided to take the leap. Once he said yes, hesitation was replaced with total commitment. For 3 grueling months, he trained in swordplay, footwork, and stunt choreography until the blade became an extension of his body. He learned to ride, to duel, and to move with a mixture of elegance and fury. By the time the cameras rolled, the nervous actor was gone. What audiences saw instead was confidence, fire, and a man stepping into legend. That risk paid off. Zorro didn't just make Antonio Banderas a star, it made him an icon. Fact number 4, Hopkins wasn't the first choice. It's hard to imagine anyone but Anthony Hopkins as Don Diego de la Vega, the aging Zorro who trains Alejandro. But Hopkins wasn't the first, or even the second choice for the role. Originally, the studio pursued Sean Connery. He had the gravitas, the accent, and the history of playing larger-than-life figures. But Connery's schedule didn't align, and he stepped away. Next came Raul Julia, a legendary actor known for roles like Gomez Addams. He wanted the part, but his declining health made it impossible. Tragically, Julia passed away before filming began, casting a shadow over the production. For a while, the role sat unclaimed, and the future of the character felt uncertain. Enter Anthony Hopkins, only weeks before shooting began. Fresh from critical acclaim in films like Nixon and The Edge, Hopkins didn't need the role, but something about the weary swordsman passing on his legacy resonated with him. He grew the beard, trained hard, and stepped into the role with quiet strength. Hopkins didn't just play Don Diego, he embodied him, giving the film its heart. What could have been a casting disaster became one of its greatest triumphs. Fact number 5. Fire on set. Practical effects bring authenticity, but they also bring danger. During the filming of one of the movie's climactic explosions, the special effects crew miscalculated. What was meant to be a controlled blast went far beyond the planned radius. Flames roared hotter than expected, props were destroyed, and parts of the set were scorched. For a few terrifying moments, cast and crew scrambled, unsure whether everyone would make it out safely. No one was seriously hurt, but the incident rattled the team. From that day on, new safety measures were enforced. Fire crews were placed on standby, explosions were rehearsed multiple times before filming, and the actors were told to trust nothing unless they saw it tested firsthand. The realism of the final sequences, the heat, the chaos, the danger, wasn't just acting. It was born out of the fact that, at least once, the danger was very real. That close call became part of the legend. The Mask of Zorro didn't just fight villains on screen, it fought fire behind the scenes. The result was action that looked dangerous because, at times, it truly was. Fact number 6. Catherine Zeta-Jones was unknown. When Catherine Zeta-Jones auditioned for The Mask of Zorro, Hollywood didn't know her name. At that time, she was known mostly for British TV roles and a few small film appearances. Nothing that screamed leading lady. But director Martin Campbell saw something in her. She wasn't just beautiful. She had presence, fire, and a natural intensity that couldn't be taught. The studio wasn't convinced. Casting an unknown in such a high-stakes role felt reckless. But when Zeta-Jones performed her audition scene, fierce, proud, and unwavering, they realized she wasn't just reading lines. She was Elena, the daughter of Don Diego de la Vega, raised in privilege but destined for conflict. Once filming began, her chemistry with Antonio Banderas lit up the screen. She could match his energy, his charm, and even his swordplay. By the time the film premiered, Catherine Zeta-Jones wasn't an unknown anymore. She was a breakout star. Overnight, Hollywood embraced her. The Mask of Zorro launched her into superstardom, eventually leading her to win an Academy Award just a few years later. Zorro didn't just give audiences a new hero, it introduced the world to a new leading lady. Fact number 7. The duel that took weeks. One of the film's most iconic moments is the duel between Alejandro and Elena, the training fight that turns into a flirtatious, unforgettable showdown. On screen, it looks fluid, playful, and perfectly timed. But behind the scenes, that duel was a nightmare of choreography. Every move had to be precise. Too fast and someone could get hurt. Too slow and the energy would die. Director Martin Campbell wanted the fight to be more than action. It had to tell a story. Alejandro was testing Elena. Elena was defiant, proud, and unwilling to back down. The duel wasn't just about swords, it was about dominance, attraction, and discovery. To capture that, the stunt coordinators broke the fight into dozens of tiny sections. Banderas and Zeta-Jones rehearsed day after day, perfecting footwork, sword angles, and reactions. It took weeks to film what audiences see as just a few minutes of screen time. And then came the finale, when Alejandro strips Elena of her clothes with a single flourish. Risky, playful, and unforgettable, that moment became one of the most talked about scenes in the film. The duel wasn't just a fight, it was cinema magic, built from sweat, bruises, and endless rehearsal. Fact number 8. The director's battle. Martin Campbell was no stranger to pressure. He had already revived the James Bond franchise with GoldenEye, proving he could handle spectacle and action. But Zorro was different. Unlike Bond, Zorro carried cultural weight. He wasn't just an action hero, he was a symbol. That meant Campbell wasn't just making a movie, he was making a legacy. The studio, however, kept interfering. They wanted bigger explosions, faster pacing, and more humor. Campbell pushed back, insisting the film needed heart, tradition, and Spanish authenticity. At one point, tensions rose so high that there were rumors of him being replaced. But Campbell refused to back down. He fought to keep practical stunts instead of drowning the film in CGI. He fought to keep Spanish architecture, Mexican landscapes, and authentic costumes rather than Hollywood shortcuts. Most importantly, he fought to keep the film's tone balanced. Serious enough to honor the legend, but playful enough to capture the swashbuckling charm of classic adventure films. In the end, his battles paid off. Campbell didn't just direct The Mask of Zorro, he protected it. And without that stubborn fight behind the camera, Zorro might have been just another generic blockbuster. Fact number 9, a horse with star power. You can't have Zorro without his horse, but casting the right animal wasn't easy. The horse had to be fast, strong, and beautiful, but also intelligent enough to perform complex stunts. After months of searching, the production team found Andalusian stallions that could handle the role. These horses weren't just trained for riding, they were trained for performance. Antonio Banderas spent weeks bonding with the animal, learning how to ride at high speed, make sharp turns, and pull off dangerous-looking stunts without spooking the horse. The stallion had to be calm under pressure, surrounded by explosions, gunfire, and shouting crowds, yet still responsive to subtle cues. One scene where Zorro's horse leaps through fire became a defining moment of the film. It wasn't CGI, it wasn't trick photography. That horse actually charged through flames, guided carefully by trainers, and protected with safety measures. The audience saw real danger, and that authenticity gave the scene power. By the end of production, the horse had become as much a character as Zorro himself. Not just a companion, but a partner in every daring escape. Fact number 10, the sound of the sword. The film's sword fights felt alive, but what audiences heard wasn't always real. Real blades don't always sound cinematic. They clash with dull thuds rather than sharp, ringing tones. To make the fights thrilling, the sound team had to create a new language of steel. They recorded metal striking metal, knives against crowbars, and even kitchen utensils. Then in post-production, they layered and exaggerated those sounds until every swing had weight, every clash had spark. When Alejandro and Elena crossed swords, it wasn't just a duel, it was a symphony of steel. But sound wasn't limited to the blades. The team amplified the swish of cloaks, the thud of boots on dirt, and even the breath of the fighters. All of it combined to create immersion. So audiences didn't just watch the fight, they felt it. The result? A soundscape so iconic that fans still remember it decades later. Every clang and swish became part of Zorro's identity. The film wasn't just seen, it was heard. Fact number 11, Antonio Banderas did his own stunts. Most action stars let stunt doubles handle the dangerous work. But Antonio Banderas insisted on doing as much as possible himself. He trained daily, sword fighting, horseback riding, and high-fall stunts, until he could move like a true swashbuckler. There's one scene where Zorro swings from a chandelier, lands perfectly, and dives into a sword fight. That wasn't a double, it was Banderas rehearsing until the motion felt natural. He even performed dangerous horseback maneuvers, like vaulting onto the saddle in one smooth move. The studio panicked at first. Insurance companies begged the director to use doubles for safety, but Banderas pushed back. He believed the audience would feel the difference if it wasn't him. And he was right. The authenticity shows in every frame. By the end of production, Banderas had earned respect not just as an actor, but as a stuntman. He didn't just play Zorro, he became Zorro. Fact number 12, the explosive train finale. The film's climax is pure spectacle, a runaway train, loaded with gold and explosives, thundering toward destruction. But here's the twist. Much of that sequence was filmed with real explosions, real fire, and real danger. Miniatures were used for some wide shots, but director Martin Campbell demanded practical stunts for close-ups. That meant stunt performers riding real trains, sparks flying, while controlled blasts went off around them. It was dangerous, chaotic, and incredibly hard to film. The production team built sections of the train on rigs, so cameras could follow the action at high speed. Each explosion had to be perfectly timed. Too early, and the stuntmen could be injured. Too late, and the shot was ruined. When it all came together, the finale delivered one of the most unforgettable action climaxes of the 1990s. Audiences didn't just watch it, they felt the danger. Fact number 13, Anthony Hopkins' transformation. Sir Anthony Hopkins was already a legend when he signed on to play Don Diego de la Vega, the original Zorro. But he didn't want to just show up and deliver lines. He wanted to transform. Hopkins trained for months in sword fighting, horseback riding, and physical conditioning. At the time, he was in his late 50s, but he moved with the speed and grace of a much younger man. The swordmaster admitted Hopkins surprised everyone with how quickly he adapted. But what made Hopkins unforgettable wasn't just the swordplay. It was the weight he brought to the role. His Zorro carried decades of pain, loss, and wisdom. When he handed the mantle to Alejandro, audiences felt the gravity of a legend passing into history. Hopkins didn't just play a mentor, he became the soul of the film. Fact number 14, the flamenco fire. One of the film's most underrated elements is its music. Composed by James Horner, the score blended sweeping orchestral themes with fiery flamenco rhythms. But here's the secret. Many of those flamenco flourishes were performed live on set. During scenes of celebration, real Spanish guitarists and dancers performed while cameras rolled. Their rhythms guided the actors, giving the dances and sword fights a natural, hypnotic tempo. Even the duel between Alejandro and Elena feels like a dance. Because in many ways it was. The soundtrack became iconic, mixing traditional Spanish sounds with Hollywood scale. Every strum, every clap, every shout of "Olé" added authenticity. The music didn't just support the action, it was the heartbeat of Zorro. Fact number 15, Catherine Zeta-Jones's injuries behind the glamour. Catherine Zeta-Jones took her share of bruises. During rehearsals, her knuckles bled from sword strikes. In one scene, she was accidentally cut on the arm when a blade slipped. Instead of stopping, she pushed through. She trained harder, determined to match Banderas move for move. Crew members said she approached swordplay like a professional fencer. Precise, disciplined, fearless. By the end of production, she wasn't just acting like a fighter, she was one. The audience never knew how many bruises hid under her costume. They only saw a woman who could stand toe-to-toe with Zorro. Fact number 16, the hidden Spanish history. Though set in California, the film is steeped in Spanish and Mexican history. The haciendas, the costumes, the traditions. They weren't Hollywood inventions. Designers studied archives of 19th century California to recreate authentic details. The story itself reflected tensions of the time. Wealth versus poverty, colonial power versus the people, justice versus corruption. Zorro wasn't just a masked hero, he was a voice for the voiceless. Audiences may have come for the swashbuckling adventure, but they left with a glimpse of the real history behind the legend. Fact number 17, Antonio's dangerous leap, one of Banderas's most dangerous stunts, nearly went wrong. In a scene, Zorro leaps onto a moving carriage, sword drawn. Banderas insisted on doing it himself. The timing had to be perfect. Too soon, and he'd miss the carriage. Too late, and he'd crash into the wheels. On the first attempt, he slipped, but recovered with cat-like reflexes. That recovery looked so real that the director kept it in the final cut. It wasn't just a stunt, it was a moment that proved Zorro wasn't superhuman. He was daring, reckless, and sometimes barely escaping disaster. Exactly what made him relatable. Fact number 18, Hopkins and Banderas' bond off-screen. Anthony Hopkins and Antonio Banderas formed a real father-son bond. Hopkins took Banderas under his wing, giving him advice not just about acting, but about navigating Hollywood. On set, they often stayed in character between takes. Hopkins as the wise mentor, Banderas as the fiery apprentice. Crew members said their chemistry was so natural, many scenes barely needed directing. That bond carried onto the screen. When Diego finally passes the torch to Alejandro, the emotion wasn't just acting, it was real respect, captured forever on film. Fact number 19, the legacy of practical effects. Today, most action films lean heavily on CGI, but The Mask of Zorro relied on practical effects. Real fire, real stunts, real sword fights. That's why it holds up decades later. When audiences watch, they're not seeing pixels. They're seeing flesh, sweat, and danger. The dirt on Banderas's face was real. The explosions rattled the set. The danger was tangible. That choice gave Zorro something rare: timelessness. The film doesn't feel dated because real stunts never age. Fact number 20, the mask lives on. When The Mask of Zorro premiered in 1998, it wasn't just a hit, it was a revival of swashbuckling cinema. Suddenly, audiences remembered the joy of adventure films with real heroes, real romance, and real danger. The mask itself became iconic, so much so that Banderas kept one after filming. He said it wasn't just a prop, it was a reminder of the role that defined him. More than 25 years later, Zorro's shadow still lingers. The legend of the masked swordsman continues to inspire remakes, reboots, and dreams of justice. And it all traces back to the fire, sweat, and passion of the Mask of Zorro. The Mask of Zorro proved that legends never die. They just find new heroes to wear the mask. From dangerous stunts to breakout stars, every detail made history. So next time you watch Zorro ride, remember, you're not just seeing a movie, you're witnessing a legacy.